Martin Taylor, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hello, Jake. Thank you very much.
Martin, I wanted to ask you, I love this idea. I have friends here in town that, quote unquote, live this gypsy lifestyle. But I was hoping you could talk about the kind of gypsy lifestyle that you were raised with your father and your parents when you were growing up.
Well, my father's family were traveler people in the UK, but we lived in a house. My mother came from a different background, so I was born in a house, raised in a house. But of course, there's always something there. I mean, I have spent my entire life traveling, so despite the first probably 14, 15 years of my life living in one place, I've been constantly traveling ever since. But what happened for me, and the reason why I do what I do, is because my father was a jazz musician. His name was Buck Taylor, and he played the string bass. And as a child, my earliest recollections are listening to my dad and his friends playing guitars and various instruments, and then putting the record player on and listening to the Hot Club of France. And there was something, even though all the other music that my dad played, like Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, there was just something that really I found so engaging about Django Reinhardt's playing. It was as if his it just got to me directly, because it was as if his guitar was talking to me, and really that's because he was such a melodic improviser, and he just told stories when he improvised, and that's what I try to do, whether I'm up on stage playing solo as I am at the moment here in Seattle, or in a group situation with the guys. I consider playing music as storytelling, and that's really what I kind of inherited from my upbringing, listening to Django play from kind of day one. In fact, I would have been listening to Django when I was still in my mother's, when I was still in the womb.
Right. No, I mean, a lot of the guys that I talked to, they grew up hearing the blues when they were in the womb, and then they came out, and it's that deeply rooted. But going back to could you talk to the audience a little bit about, I mean, I see a lot of records, the gypsy swing or this kind of gypsy music, and there's like a belly dancer on the front. It's like more of a Middle Eastern kind of connotation. Mm-hmm. But as far as the idea of, how would you define that idea, like just being on the road? Obviously, you were stationary for 14 or 15 years, but once you really got into that, living not materialistically, maybe just having your guitar and just tell me a little bit about that, how it helped you gain security in your music and also your growth as a human being.
Well, I always had a home base, and my wife and I, we met when we were only 16, and we've been together ever since. And so I became a father when I was 19.
Wow.
And so I always kept a family home for my wife and kids. And then I would go out and go on the road, earn money, playing music. Then I'd come back, and that's kind of how it all worked. So I think you'll find I work with a lot of gypsy musicians in France and Germany, and particularly in Germany, they all have very nice lifestyles of musicians that I know. They all have real nice houses. It's very important to the gypsy people to have really nice things and a nice place to be. I think there's very often a complete misunderstanding.
Absolutely, there apparently is, yeah,
about traveling people just not being materialistic.
You know what? Yeah, no, I want you. That's exactly. It's kind of one of these things where it's the gypsy musical lifestyle is just one where you're playing music and moving around a lot. It doesn't mean that you have nothing or that
Yeah.
you're not don't have a stationary place to live.
But the most important thing is family. So that's important that that is established and looked after. That's the most important thing. When you think, when I was working with Stephane Grapelli for many years, and when the Second World War broke out, Stephane and Django were in England. They were in London because they worked a lot in England. And Django's immediate instinct was to go home, to be with family. And Stephane's was that, well, I'll sit this one out. I know lots of people here in London. I've got a nice career. I'll see what happens. But for Django, it was that homing instinct of just going home. Family is home. So when a lot of people said, why did he go back to France, when the war broke out, when France was occupied, and it wasn't really a safe place for a gypsy to be. But for him, it was just a natural instinct to be back with family. So wherever I am, there's always this homing instinct of going back, and I love being at home. And my home is very important to me, even though I spend so much time on the road.
That's right. Well, it's funny. Sometimes at home with my family, I start to get real claustrophobic, and I need air. So I feel like when you need space, that's when you're out on the road traveling, but then you can come home, and it's that perfect balance. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I used to get itchy feet at home. After a while, I want to get out again. But as I get older, I find it harder and harder to leave home. It's changed really because I've been on the roads now since I was 15, and I've been doing this a long time. And it's once I'm on the road, then I just lock into a completely different. A different way of being. I know a lot of musicians that I work with are like that. I work quite often with a wonderful Swedish guitar player, Ulf Bekenius, who played guitar with Oscar Peterson for many years. And we work quite often in Asia. And recently we met up. We were both in Korea, and we met up, and we've both been at home, me at home in Scotland, and Ulf in Sweden. He's been at home for about a month or so. And when it came to leave home, we didn't really want to leave our wives, but once we met up in Korea, we were straight back into being those kind of road rats, living on the road. And you just fall into that, and you learn how to live on the road. And fortunately, I've never had to live rough when I've been touring. I know musicians that have told me stories about having to stay in really bad places and. When they started out, I was very fortunate right from the very beginning. I always got to stay in really good hotels and eating good restaurants. And then in my very early days with Stephane Grapelli, when I was only 22, I was only 22, but I'd still been out on the road for quite a few years. And then we were treated very regally, and that's pretty much the way it's been ever since. So. I think sometimes there's a little romanticism that people like to think of the tortured artist struggling and everything. But we're like everyone else. We like to live a comfortable life as well. And I'm very fortunate that I've been able to do that for so long.
The idea of improvisational music was your dad. He was an upright bass player, but from a very early age, you said you were listening. Was improvisational music always a comfortable thing for you? Was it something that you had to work on? And it was
something that I understood pretty well immediately. My dad was unusual really because he didn't take up playing music until he was 30. So when my father was 30, I was only 2 years old. So in a way, I started playing the guitar when I was 4 years old. So in a way, we were starting out in music at the same time, which is very kind of interesting. My dad was only a few years ahead of me. Mm-hmm. He'd only been playing a little while before me. So we were both on a voyage of discovery, father and son. And But I can remember my dad not being schooled in music. He didn't read music or he didn't study music. He played purely by ear, as I did for the first 20 years of playing. I never read music. But I can remember him playing a recording of Django, and for argument's sake, say it was Sweet Georgia Brown, and he played the melody of Sweet Georgia Brown, and then it went off into this other stuff. And then I remember my dad saying to me, and this was the best music lesson I've ever had. My dad said to me, he said, "Do you know what he's doing there?" He said, "He's improvising." And I said, "Well, what's that?" And he said, "Well, he's making up his own melody over the same chords." And I understood that immediately. Very often when jazz improvisation is taught in colleges, it's taught like it's a science subject. It's taught like it's mathematics or physics or something. And they tell you, well, you can play this mode over this, and that over that, and it becomes, it becomes overwhelming for the student. The way I teach my students how to improvise, I just take my dad's advice. I get them to play a melody, and then I say, right, the next time round, play that melody slightly differently, still stick with the melody, but just change it slightly, vary it a little bit more. The next time you go around, you can vary it a little more again. And then, so we start with the melody, and then we move out. And that's the way all the old jazz musicians played. That's the way Stephane Grapelli played. It's the way Django played, Louis Armstrong, all those, the old great players. They could all play a melody. They started with a melody and then just varied it. And then going back into European classical music, Beethoven, Mozart, they were all improvisers. That's why in classical music you'll always see variations on a theme. So you have the theme, and then each time goes around, it varies. And that's really how I teach my students. It demystifies it. It's not a great mystery. You just start with a melody and start taking it from there. And when you start with the melody, that comes back to what I was saying earlier about Django, how his music was talking to me, and how it was storytelling. When you start with the melody and then you start moving around with that melody, it becomes a story, and you take the listener on a journey with that story.
So poetic. Talking to Martin Taylor here, and talking about storytelling. You guys are about to go on this super group tour, and as opposed to the hotbed with Grapelli back when pre-digitization, when there were not so many distractions, and when we were talking before we got on the air about those swampy bars. But the truth is that I feel like my generation, younger generations especially, have lost the ability. Not, we can listen, but there's active listening, and then there's listening. And do you feel? Do you have people come up to you, and do you hope that people will come up to you on this tour and say, "Boy, you really were talking to me up there"? I mean, do you feel like you have to fight harder to get the audience's attention now, as opposed to maybe when you first started out?
No, I don't find it harder at all. And I think one of the reasons is I don't think people have really changed that much. Attention span is less. And I know that because I'm just the same like everyone else. My attention span is very short nowadays, where it wasn't at one time. But so the audience really haven't changed that much. But I've changed. I've just become a better storyteller, and I'm just more experienced at it. So.
Can you break that down a little bit? How are you become better?
Well, I understand music far better now than I did before, and the range of the emotions that I have and can convey in music is so much wider, and a lot of that has come not just as developing as a musician, but developing as a human being, and experiences that we have through our lives. And we all have the same emotions and the same feelings. We all share those. But when you have some, deep experiences happen, then you feel you have those same emotions, but they're far more extreme. So I know, it's like having an amplifier that's, is more powerful. So I can touch on all these emotions when I play, But because I've experienced all of them myself very, very deeply, and deeper than maybe some people have, then I can take the listener that little bit further.
You talk about younger students, growing up or coming of age in academia, and it sort of becomes this science. It becomes very complicated, and as a result, a lot of times, you have you have books written by Pat Martino, and you have books written by this person and that, so that the younger cat is going to wind up conforming to that sound. And I just would love you to talk to the audience, especially younger generations, about working with Grapelli, the younger years, the idea of variations on a theme, and also just the ability to have the security to develop your own individual sound. And I would love you to talk about, like you said, people have not changed. So you talk to the audience about how it is essential in music to have individual sound, because that in itself creates authenticity.
Yeah, I think really we have to unlock. We have to have the key to unlock the door. And for me, when my father said that to me about Django playing, and he was just making up his own melody over the same chord sequence, that was the key. He gave me that key to open it. Now, I have many students. I have an online guitar school, and I have students in over 60 countries around the world. And I remember this is one example. There was one student of mine, and I was trying to explain something to him, and I was getting frustrated, not with him, but with myself, because I thought, what am I doing wrong here? I can't seem to get this point across. And anyway, we took a break, and I said, I just got talking to him, and I said, what do you like to do apart from playing the guitar? Do you have any other hobbies or anything? And he said he liked to play golf. So I said, great, that's fantastic. I know a little bit about golf. Mm-hmm. So I taught him, the guitar lesson became, I spoke through the kind of the medium of golf. So he was a far better golfer than he was a guitar player. And I wanted to get him up to his golfing standards. So I just used golfing analogies for everything that he was doing, and it was quite astonishing to see how he just changed, how he just got it. That was the key. I gave him the key.
Being a horrible golfer, I would just love you. Could you give me one example of how you did that?
Well, I think a lot of it. I can't remember the exact thing that happened, but it all had to do. The thing that he was learning was a technical thing. It could have been something to do with playing fingerstyle guitar, and it was been something like that. But I just remember that a lot of things that I spoke to him about, I just compared it with a golf swing, because I remember when I was taught to play golf, the guy that taught me the basics of the swing, he told me that. He gave me little ideas, and I just couldn't get this swing at all. So, and he was saying, well, imagine this or imagine that. And I was imagine you're doing this, imagine you're doing that. And eventually he said, imagine you're a bell ringer and you're pulling a piece of rope, the rope in a church, and you're pulling that rope as a bell ringer. So imagine you're ringing a bell and you're pulling the rope. And I imagined that, and I swung with the golf club, and I hit that ball for miles. He unlocked the key. He had the key that unlocked the mystery for me. So I think that's it a lot of the time. So for some people, they need to learn academically. So it's not something that you can just throw out and say, well, that's not the way to do it. Some people need that. So I have some students, because I speak very simply when I teach. I don't use any technical talk at all, technical sayings or anything. But sometimes I'll have a student that obviously comes from that background and sometimes they may even think that I don't know this stuff because I haven't used those words.
Right.
And then I've had students that then try to show me how clever they are because they start using all the different words and think that I don't know. And then I speak back to them in their language. Because the important thing is, if you want to teach somebody something, you must speak in their language. And that's really what I do, is I just try to find a common language that I can speak with the student.
There's no doubt you're a poet as well. I really want to get this on the record because it was a stunning story, and as a journalist, there have been dark alleys and then bright lights and beautiful things, but it's an ebb and flow, and I read this story somewhere about where you were literally ready to hang it up. I mean, you were going to sell off your guitar, and then it was kind of, I don't want to say it was just sort of glossed over, but it sort of, there was this epiphany and you became re-engaged and discovered your love again for it. And then, Martin Taylor Part 2, the next chapter was written. But was it really divine, or can you even add a little bit more to that story and tell the audience about adversity and overcoming adversity?
Well, I think sometimes you just have to come right up against the brick wall before you can make that decision to do something and get things back on track again. And what happened for me, actually, that was the first occasion. There's actually been two occasions in my life where I quit playing. That was the first occasion, and that was around about the mid to late 80s. And I was working with Stephane. Stephane Grapelli had a heart attack, and I'd invested kind of all of my work into Stephane for that year. So I was looking at a diary that was completely empty. I had a wife and two kids to support and a home to keep and everything. And I got very down about it, and I really couldn't see where I fitted in within the world of music. And what happened was I had a few guitars. I didn't have that many, but I had a few guitars, and I started to sell them. And I ended up only had one guitar left. W.G. Barker is the guitar that I played with Ike, with Stephane. And it was given to me by Ike Isaacs, who played guitar with Stephane before I did. And I had that guitar left, and somebody wanted to buy it, and I'd always said no. And I eventually realized that I needed to get money for my family, and I thought, well, I'll sell this. If I sell this, I don't have a guitar. So I ceased to be a guitar player. I ceased to be a musician. I'll have to do something else. And I was leaving the house with the guitar to take it to sell it. And for some reason, I decided to go in a different direction. And I sat by a loch, a lake in where I live in Scotland, and I just thought, well, this is pointless. I don't see any point to my life at this moment. And just something. It got very, very dark in my mind, and then I just thought, well, I'll play this guitar one last time before I sell it. And I got the guitar out, and I started to play. And I thought, wow, no, this is the connection. I felt that connection that I'd had with music ever since a small child. I said, no, I've got to do this. I've got to do this. So I went home, and I then contacted some people that I knew that promoted very, very small little gigs around the country, and I kind of just offered my services. And I said, can I come and play solo? Hopefully, people will like it. And so I had one guy that said, yeah, come and do it. And so I went and did a concert. I'd never played a whole evening solo before.
Wow. But
I went and did this concert, and the feeling was, at the end of the evening, when I'd played a whole concert myself, that's when I discovered that my main path was in playing solo guitar, and that's something that I followed. And once I started to do that, so many doors started to open. I still continue to collaborate with other musicians as I still do now, obviously, but that opened a whole new life, and it was a whole new journey of discovery, not just a musical discovery, huge musical journey to play solo improvised jazz guitar. It's a very specialized thing to do.
That's beautiful. No, I want to jump in for a second. Do you think that looking back on it, the angst that you had at that lake had more to do with the fact that you had been pretty comfortable with steady gigs with Stefan, and you just didn't know. It was just a matter of you saying, "I need to do it for myself now," and you had to push yourself because it wasn't a technical thing. It wasn't like you were strung out and you were losing your chops. It was more about you saying, I just gotta kick it in the pants and go and do it
Yeah.
myself now.
Well, we all have, all human beings and all animals have a survival instinct. I just knew I had to survive somehow. And I couldn't think of a better way of doing that than just to continue playing music. So but what happened along the way was quite magical. That I then, as I started to play solo guitar, and I realized I could do it, and also there's quite a lot of people liked it. And at that point, my audience was almost entirely made up of jazz fans, people that just love the music, love jazz. But then when I started to play solo, then I started getting invited to play at classical guitar festivals, at Chet Atkins convention in Nashville for all the finger pickers, and then I'd play other things at music shows where there were, I'd look out at the front row and there'd be a mixture of older people that knew me through Stefan, and they'd be sitting next to young guys with Megadeth T-shirts on, because they were just into guitar playing. So yeah, I that survival instinct kicked in, and I discovered something quite amazing, and I'm very thankful actually for that experience, because if I'd have continued, as you said, with it just kind of going along with a comfortable life, then that would have been that. But it just sent me on this incredible journey of discovery that I'm still on.
Yes, and there was another pivotal moment. You said there were two stories.
Yeah, the second time, that was 9 years ago. My youngest son Stuart took his own life, so that was extremely traumatic. Without going into the details sure. of it, but I suffered from the real trauma of that, as well as obviously the grief and the loss, and I found it very difficult to play after that, because it was just too much. And then I then for a second time thought, well, that's the end of that. I'm not going to be able to do this again. And also the music that I'd always heard in my head from a small child, it stopped. Nothing happened. I just couldn't read. I didn't hear music. It just, everything was blocked out. And this went on for about 3.5 years. And then one day I watched a TV program, and it was about soldiers in the British Army that had been to Iraq, and they were trying to get the British government to acknowledge, as they already had in the USA, post-traumatic stress disorder. Mm-hmm. And I was watching this program, and these soldiers talking, and they were talking about their symptoms, and wow, that's it, that's me, that's what happened to me. Right. And it wasn't until that point, 3.5 years after the event, that I realized that I'd been suffering from trauma. Once I knew that, then I knew how to deal with it. I thought, that's fine. I know how to do it. I know how to deal with this. And my life went back on track. I'd always, on and off over the years, ever since I was a teenager, practiced meditation as just as something to calm my mind down, really, more than not looking for enlightenment, but just to kind of
absolutely.
And so I started practicing that again, and within a very, very short time, I was back on track. Still had a few blips here and there, but so that was the second time. So coming back to what I was saying before about we all have the same emotions and we all experience the same things, but some people experience them more extremely. So, one of the reasons, I can play things that, like, it happens every night. Some people will come up to me and they'll say, oh, I love that so much. There were times when you just made me cry. Well, that's because, I'd play something that was very soulful and emotional. But I was tapping in on the depth of that I've already experienced. But I'm only giving a little bit of that. I'm only actually conveying a very small amount of that. But I just have trauma can take you to very extreme emotions.
Well, it can.
So,
I mean, I
so
know.
I understand those.
No, I mean, but it's also a matter of, you're right. And then there's a period of mourning, grief, where the music shuts off. But then at some point, you've had these really clear periods where the door reopened and it was your choice to get off the mat. You could have quit. I mean, there's a lot of people, everybody has trauma in their life, everyone, a lot. And then it's the decision of that person whether they have the stick-to-itiveness and the gumption to get up and keep moving forward and keep doing it. And I think you must be almost superhumanly strong at this point. I mean, that's really yeah.
I don't think so. I remember saying to my wife at the time, because she obviously she was going through her son too, and she dealt with everything so well. And I remember saying to her, at the time when I was really down, I said, I wish I was strong. I wish I was a strong person. And she said, well, you are. But I think someone like me who plays music and we communicate a lot of that, and actually sometimes we give too much of it away, and it kind of saps our energy, saps our strength. So I've learned also how to keep my energy and to expel any negative energy that comes my way as well. But I think we're all capable of dealing with these things. And for me, it's a strong foundation of the two things that are home for me are family and music. So if I'm with my family, I feel at home. I can be anywhere in the world. I can pick my guitar up and start playing, and I'm back there. I'm back in my home. Or I can just sit down and I can start to meditate, and I'm home. So I'm fortunate to have that, have that grounding. But if you're spinning in kind of outer space, which happens when you're in these situations, then it's very difficult to find that center again if you haven't already got something like that in your life. So I was just very fortunate that I had that, and I see people suffer very badly because they haven't had that in their life, and they've had bad experiences, and they find it very difficult, or in some cases impossible to actually overcome things like trauma and depression.
Martin, we're going to have to talk for another hour at some point. We've barely touched the surface, but my final question for you in this segment is, you are going on this guitar greats acoustic tour, and a lot of reputable venues, and you're playing with a bunch of guys. And my question is, are there keys that, I mean, I assume the four of you, when you get up there probably are keys that have to unlock doors, but for you guys, that's the fun part. Would you say that's true, or have you been playing with all of them long enough where you're in total sync? And also, what is the thing that you're most excited about going into this tour?
Well, the great thing with playing this kind of music, and with playing with musicians at the level of the guys I'm with, is that it becomes like a conversation, and you don't really know exactly. You know what you can talk about and what you can start talking about, but you don't know what direction that conversation is going to go to, and what surprises are going to come out as well. What's something someone's going to throw at you. So it's very much like a conversation when you play improvised music with other musicians, and so that's what I look forward to, because even though we've kind of worked on a set list that we're going to play the same set list every night, but it won't be the same every night. There'll be something different. It will be a completely different experience, and that's what always excites me about playing this kind of music, and it's the reason why I play it. And I've been playing it since I was a little kid, and I will continue playing it all the while I can.
Miss Martin Taylor, have a great second gig tonight at Jazz Alley, and then I'll be thinking about you guys at Yoshi's. It was just an honor to talk to you, and I'll send you an email when this thing goes up.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Jake.
Okay, Martin, I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All right,
Bye
now.
now.
Bye-bye. Folks, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show, and joined here by another member of the acoustic supergroup, great guitarists. They open up at Yoshi's in Oakland on Friday. Frank Vignola, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you. Thank you, Jake. It's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to Martin and our first shows together here. Epic.
And we're going to get into it, but I do want to start. You don't know this, but I believe I believe that we grew up in very close areas to each other. You're older than I am, but I'm a Stony Brook guy, and I wasn't sure.
Stony Brook University.
So that the craziest place in the world back in the before my time. But I was wondering. It said you grew up on suburban Long Island. I said, well, if that's the case, then that was veritable farm country back then.
Oh, Islip, absolutely.
You were in Islip.
I remember a traffic light where that Sunrise Highway is now. Now it's a big super highway. I rarely go out there anymore,
I'm curious about this cultural center of Long Island. You got some.
It's an amazing place, and
can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's in Syosset, Long Island, and it's an art school, an arts high school, part of the BOCES program. So kind of like a technical school for music, dance, art, and drama. So I went in 1981, I think, the first year. I was there for 3 years. I went a half a day and learned everything about music, analyzing Bach chorales, sight singing, solfeggio. I mean, the real deal,
Mm.
And it was wonderful. I met some dear friends there, and, all through that time, I was always working a lot, playing rhythm guitar in Dixieland and traditional jazz bands. So by the time I graduated high school, I had a great education, and I was working probably 10 gigs a week in the New York City area. So I just got a place in Manhattan and went for it, Started knocking on doors and meeting people, and met up with Les Paul back then. And it was just, here I am now at the age of 48 in Santa Cruz.
No, but it's
figure.
But I want you to talk. You grew up at a time when it was freeform radio was disappearing, but yet you were exposed to. You seem to be an active listener. On one side,
well, my father. Yeah, my father, played records all the time. I grew up listening to Les Paul records, Django Reinhardt records, Bucky Pizzerelli records, Joe Pass, Charlie Christian. And then when I was a teenager, I got into rock music, thanks to Frank Zappa.
Right.
It was the first kind of rock and roll record I really listened to. And then during the high school years, I was also studying classical music and analyzing Vivaldi and all of that stuff, which is awesome. And I think, all that paid off because there's 500 years of music to choose from. It's like, what to play? There's always something to work on. That's what I really like about music and having the way I was brought up. Plus, again, I always worked a lot, So I think that's a key to growing as a performing musician is you got to get out there and work as much as possible so you play in front of people instead of in a practice room.
Well, that's part of my thesis for whatever this book eventually gets written, is just the idea. When I interviewed Kenny Burrell, his school was Detroit. It was the city of Detroit, with Elvin Jones and with Yusef Lateef.
And Billy Mitchell, who I was dear friends with and recorded with, he was kind of the elder. He gave Kenny Burrell his first gigs, Elvin Jones, Coltrane, all those Detroit guys.
You gigged with Billy Mitchell in New York?
Oh yeah.
Oh
yeah.
Oh
I
man.
Him every Wednesday night. We toured a little bit. We did one record together, my first record on Concord with Billy as the guest. He was the best.
But my
He
point
was
is that
such a cool guy, and you know what he
Yeah.
taught me? All the beboppers, they were about songs. They knew a zillion songs, and if you didn't play the right melody, they would yell at you.
Right. No, I loved the leadership style. Those guys burned. They did not
Oh,
stop. They just played at a Sonny Stitt was like that.
Sonny Stitt, Frank West, who just passed
That's right.
away.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I recorded 2 records with him, and he was the same way. I used to shake when I played with him. No, I mean, because in like Hank Jones was another one I shaked at first playing with them because, first of all, they're, you know, for a music geek like me, it's like, you know, that's the top of the league right there.
Absolutely.
And then just everything they played sounded so good. I'm like, how do you do that, you know?
Do you
It really makes you pay attention to what you're playing, you know?
You know, to me, it's about like what you talked about before, the experiential part of music. You know, not playing, you know, walled up in a room, but getting out there in different venues, and playing in front of different types of folks, and then ultimately creating your own individual sound. And I was talking about this with Martin as well. It's just I was hoping you could talk a little bit about going into this acoustic supergroup, this tour that you're about to go on. How do you balance making sure that your individual sound is on display, and also helping to tell a story with the rest of the guys?
That's the easy and the fun part to me. I mean, Martin does such an unbelievable thing with solo guitar, probably, one of the top 3 of all time. You know, Joe Pass, Tommy Emmanuel, and Martin Taylor. When I think of solo guitar, those are the 3 guys, you know. So obviously he should be featured on a couple of solo tunes. Vinny and I, for what we do 200 shows a year, so we have a really good thing going. And then Peppino does something a little bit different, a little special, with the nylon string and some acoustic guitar. So obviously we should all be featured, but then my thing was, and I think we all are coming from the same headspace, that we should have kind of a unique repertoire that all 4 of us play together. You know, then you have the combination of like playing some of the more swing stuff with Martin and Vinny and I. So we have a nice arrangement of the Airmail Special and 3-part harmony, and so that's the fun part. And then it's just flow. I mean, you need a good flow to a show. It's not all about just showing off,
Absolutely.
But there needs to be a nice flow. So we're going to start off with 2 4-guitar numbers, and then they'll break it down, and Martin and Peppino have a couple of duets worked up. They'll play a few. Then Vinny and I will do a few, and then we'll end with a 4-guitar number.
Oh, I see. So it is broke. Continue.
And then the second part of the show, Martin will come out by himself, play a few numbers. Then Peppino will come out by himself, play a few numbers. And then Vinny and I will come out again and do a couple of our maybe classical numbers. And then end with the 4 guitars. Maybe Martin, I think that's right. We're going to do 1 trio number, the Airmail Special, and then all end is the 4 guitars. So I think it's going to be a great flow. I mean, if you like guitar, you'd kind of be foolish not to take advantage of this, because just everybody's schedule, it's really hard to coordinate a tour like this.
I was looking at your tour dates, and you're in California one day, and then next day you're in the East Coast doing
that's part of this tour. I mean, the way we look at it, it's a long plane ride, but what are we going to turn down a beautiful opportunity to play in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital? You know what I mean?
No way. You're definitely taking that.
So you sit on a plane for 5 hours, and you're a little tired. But once you get on stage, it's like, yeah, I'm sure glad I did this.
Frank, I wanted to ask you, in your mind, you got an apartment in the city in 81. New York, I'm assuming
84 actually. That's
okay, yeah, okay. So, but I mean, how New York still has a reputation as being, this jazz mecca. But I wanted to ask you specifically, how has live music changed since you really started in New York in the early 80s?
Live music has changed, that there is a lot of people who are willing to work for free, and there are a lot of people who are willing to play for the door, as they put it, or percentage of the door. as opposed to when I was kind of on the scene in New York City. I mean, even if it was a cafe gig every Tuesday night, it would still pay a certain amount of money. You know, $50 or $80, or not that those gigs don't exist, but they're, you know, it's really hard to demand a lot of money when you first start out in New York. You really have to be willing to play for nothing and get your name out there. Then the sky's the limit. I mean, Vinny, my partner, he lives in my musical partner, lives in Queens, lives in New York, and every time we're off the road, he works 2 gigs a day. So, but he had to start in New York by getting a place, and then, you know, going around to the jam sessions, playing gigs for free, and before you know it, you know, you're working every night of the week because New York has that much work.
You said something interesting though, and I guess my question is, when you started why did they pay? Did they pay because they considered it work as opposed to art or music being art? You know, there was a clear delineation. To me, the concept has been lost. I don't know if people are willing to play for free or for the door, or the mere fact that people that own clubs, cafes, understood that this was actually work and that people deserve to be paid for their work, whether it was $50 or not. That to me seems to be a value thing that has changed. I'm curious about your opinion about that.
I do agree with what you're saying. It definitely has changed, and I think just, you know, again, it just starts with people, you know, going in and knowing you're getting $50 and they'll play for 20. And then eventually that kind of mentality over the years has been like, oh, well, we'll play for tips. Mm-hmm. You know, I've seen gigs where people, great musicians too, who are on the scene, and they're passing the hat around. That's their pay.
Right.
You know, I mean, I can play in my basement and be completely content. I don't need to drive into Manhattan and, you know, to play for tips, you know. I mean, plus there's so much work out there. I mean, that's the other thing. You can get established in New York City, but there are some people who never work in New York City, and they work all over the planet, and they're very successful.
What do you, when you step back from it, what are you still trying to grow as a human being and as a musician at this point? You've done so much, but yet, you know, as any artist, if you're not growing, you're dying. So what do you want to continue to work on? What are the things that you want to continue to cultivate about your entire experience?
Well, I mean, as far as growing as a person, having 4 boys at home, I mean, obviously,
good luck.
You always try to be the best. Yeah, I know. But, you know, it's very fulfilling and grounding, I'll tell you that. And it's a pretty amazing experience, and it forces you to, you know, really take a good look at yourself and how you react to situations, and that goes across the board, you know, whether it's driving in traffic or just the communication with your children, you know. So, which is really tough, especially when you travel so much, you know. So I'm always trying to just, you know, have more patience, I guess. The older I get, the more I realize you have to have a lot of patience. As far as music, and I mean, we're doing our first symphony show, which I'm extremely excited about in a few weeks. So that's an area that I'd like to explore more.
Can you explain that? Can you explain what that is?
Well, like, you know, in front of a symphony, like a pops orchestra. Mm-hmm. So we'll go do our thing, and then we'll have 90 pieces backing us up, if you will. So that's kind of cool, you know. And so I'm hoping to do more of that. You know, as far as material, again, there's so much material, and I'm always trying to work on new songs, revisit ones that I don't know quite well enough, and just researching new material, new composers, you know. Tchaikovsky, I mean, he did Swan Lake, but he did so much more, as everybody knows. Mm-hmm. So, you know, recently I just been checking out Leonard Bernstein, you know, another. I never realized what a powerful musical figure he was. You know, not only his conducting, I mean, this guy conducted 52 minutes of Tchaikovsky, the Boston Orchestra, Symphony Orchestra, and he was singing along. He knew every part that was going on, which to me is amazing. I mean, memorizing a 32-bar song seems quite difficult sometimes.
That's right.
I couldn't imagine having to, know 90 different pieces of an orchestra and every little part. But then also the way he was a great educator. There's a lot of great stuff on YouTube of him, with the orchestra teaching kids. He would do that every Sunday afternoon or once a month, and it was a televised program. So it's just him talking about melody, composition, and he puts it in such simple terms that just even I was blown away at the profoundness of the simplicity, how he talked about music. So, there's so much to explore. I mean, I love playing jazz, too. So one thing I'd like to, kind of do at one point is get a really great quartet together with bass and piano and drums and, and just play a lot of those great old standards that I grew up playing with guys like Billy Mitchell and Frank West. And so
I hear this is the key.
Plus, there's a lot of great younger musicians out there. I mean, everywhere I go, I'm meeting these kids who are just playing unbelievable.
Are they playing? Do they have their own? I guess that's the thing, is that because there was a record-based industry, commerce-based industry around records, and that was the major medium, and then you had these incredible freeform radio stations where you would hear Peter, Paul, and Mary, the Kingston Trio, Cannonball Adderley, Ray Charles, all in a half hour. These kids today, do you look at them and say, wow, I've never heard anything like that, or are they channeling and they, because they want to sound like Bird, or they want to sound like, I mean, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, everybody has their influences. We're all influenced. When you're kind of breaking onto the scene, obviously experience starts to count. And that's the one thing that I've noticed where, Vinny, he's going to be 30. When I started working with him, he was 21. And there's just such an eagerness to learn. And when you give someone opportunity, that's when they grow into their own sound. Mm. And I think, again, it just has to do, what I mean by opportunity is work opportunity. I mean, from doing, 1 or 2 gigs a week, all of a sudden you're playing every night on the road in 5-6 hour drives and, all that kind of stuff. That's what really develops one's own sound. Unless you're one of the gifted few like Django or Charlie Parker who just picked up the guitar for the first time and started playing like Django Reinhardt,
Right.
Otherwise, you do have influences and you do copy people. And then there's, comes a point where you just should be so busy working that you're developing your own thing.
Frank, I wanted to ask you, when I talked to John Abercrombie, he said, if you want to have a gig, then you need to know how to play rhythm guitar, and you need to know how to play rhythm. And and it's easy, and that's not easy to do. And I was wondering if you ever came across. I wanted to ask you, did you play with a percussionist, trap set guy, Max Roche, anybody that helped you become more helped your rhythm playing when it came to jazz?
Elvin Jones.
Can you talk about that?
I did a show, and I didn't know who was going to be in the band. It was kind of an all-star band with Lionel Hampton. And I walk out to the sound check, and I look to my right, and there's Hank Jones at the piano. I look and back at me, there's Ray Brown on the bass. And I look to the left, and there's Elvin Jones on the drums.
Unreal.
Lionel Hampton and me, the little white guitar player.
No way. Are there tapes of this? I need a tape of that.
Actually, I have a very poor quality VHS of that.
Well, let's get that out there.
There was also a tuba player who was sitting in. So it was kind of an interesting thing. And you know what? Elvin played brushes the whole time behind me, behind everybody.
My God. That's
it was unbelievable. You know what it taught me? That he had the sense and the musical sense and no ego involved to do what was right for the ensemble. And then trading eights with him was a freak out because it's like, you know, and what I learned from a drummer in Arizona was always tap your foot on beats 1 and 3. That way, if the drummer goes off into these polyrhythms, you know exactly when to come in.
Interesting.
So I remember, you know, he would do 8, and within 2 seconds, I had no idea what beat 1 was, and that's the beautiful thing about Elvin Jones, you know, and why I'm a big fan. So I would just tap on 1 and 3, and then I would come down on 1, and sure enough, boom, the big downbeat, and he would be smiling at me, you know.
You need to figure out a way to convert that to digital before that.
I do. I have a whole box of VHS tapes, including a bunch of stuff with Les Paul and Mark O'Connor, a lot of great stuff, and I have the setup to do it. It's just time, to be honest with you, Jake.
I'm just saying. Listen, I don't want to hear one day about your basement getting flooded and those VHS tapes are gone.
Well, yeah, no, it's up. They're up pretty high.
All right, now listen.
Instruments and tapes and records and all that stuff is about 4 feet off the ground. So
yeah, it's safe. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you. Please tell me about your music relationship with Donald Fagen.
He, believe it or not, when I was in New York City in my early 20s, I was never afraid to knock on doors. So I walked into the biggest cabaret in New York City where Mel Torme was playing and asked the guy for a job in a Django tribute.
Right.
The guy said, okay, you start in 3 weeks. All of a sudden I'm thrust into, like, you know, reviewers, TV cameras. And then about a year after that, at Michael's Pub, we started doing another place, I forget the name of it, every Wednesday night. And at the front table every week was Donald Fagen.
No.
No, I'm not kidding.
Unbelievable.
His wife, I know, that's what I said. And that's why you have to be in New York City, Jake. Because every time you play in New York City, you never know who's going to be out there. And that's really why young musicians should be in New York City.
And what was your...
So anyway,
yeah, right, go...
And he was quiet. I would sit down at the table occasionally, and his girlfriend at the time, she would be the conversationalist, and he was just kind of quiet, you know. And then about 8 years after that, or 10 years after that, out of the blue, the phone rings. I pick it up. I said, hi, it's Donald Fagen. I said, oh, how you doing? You know, I didn't know if it was a joke, but I wasn't going to take the chance, you know. So he said, I want you to do come in and come on a track on my new record. I said, okay, went in there. We spent about 8 hours in the studio. I must have played about 150 different guitar solos, different guitars, pedals. But you know what I remember most about it was I was a big Steely, I still am a big Steely Dan fan.
Sure.
So then, you know, just going into the little studio, sitting down, and there he is at the board. He's showing me the chord changes he wrote up, and he's, you know, telling me a little about the song. It's called Morph the Cat. And then he said, you want to hear it? I said, yeah. He hit the button, and I swear the sound came out, and I was just like, started shaking, you know, because it was like a new Steely Dan song.
Right, exactly. You're hearing it, right?
Unbelievable. So, you know, and those are great experiences. And, you know, working with pop people like that, I've always been fortunate that when they want a certain sound, they will call me because it's a unique sound that's based on tradition. You know, I mean, I don't really play Strat or use the wah-wah pedal. I have them. I have a lot of fun with them, but that's not my thing. And I think that's, you know, important, again, what you were talking about, trying to develop your own sound and uniqueness. And I just think it's a lot of experience because I tried to do some rock and roll stuff, and then I listened to like a really great rock band or Mahavishnu. I'm like, okay, I love the standards. You know
right.
I really do. I'm like, I love to listen to that music, and I'm really get engrossed in it and can't believe what I'm hearing, like Billy Cobham and John McLaughlin. But, you know, I mean, I would much rather play Stardust, you know?
Absolutely.
But when I listen to music, I'll listen to that. So it's kind of interesting.
Frank, you know, as we wrap up this session. I'd love to do more with you because we haven't even talked about a myriad of things. But I wanted to ask.
Hey, anytime you want to call and do an extended one or one every month, I would be totally into it.
Yeah, maybe twice. No, twice a month. No, I really
to write a book myself. You know.
I want to ask you. Tell me what you are most excited about. What should the audience be most excited about for this upcoming Great Guitars tour?
Well, number one, it's the first tour. And it's really the first time we're playing together. And there's always a real special energy that happens when you have that initial coming together of especially guitar players, musicians in general, but in this case specifically guitar players. It's really something happens with the energy that's very, very exciting.